So here we go then. Okay, brilliant. Evening, everybody. Good to see you, Tony. How are you, mate?
I'm good, thanks, bud.
Yeah. Interesting, really interesting year in terms of all sorts of challenges, and it's a really unusual balance I'm trying to strike, because when you think about it, the European Championships, the World Championships are the most remote thing in people's minds, but the balance comes in trying to be positive, even though Mike's drinking a beer when he should be training, but keeping positive despite all
it's nanny state. Nanny state, yeah.
Absolutely. But anyway, so what I'm going to do until the job no longer exists, or there's no events, I'll keep pushing out initiatives. I'm not expecting everybody to do everything, and you may be doing stuff in your own time, so I'll just keep generating this stuff, and if it's of any use to you, fine, and if not, then fine. But I'm happy to listen to any other ideas, criticisms, positive or otherwise. Anyway, so question: what is technique? We all talk about it, we bash the idea around, we bash the concept around, but what is it? Any thoughts? We talk about it. What is it? What is it? What's the aim?
It's the process we go through for paddling.
Right. Okay. So if you think of sport, sport is you take a body, except in para paddlers, most bodies work the same way, and the idea is to deliver some sort of forces, use some sort of instruments to make something happen. Yeah. So that's sport, and the technique is really just the mechanism by which that happens. And most techniques are trying to get the body to work in the most efficient and effective way, whether that's playing darts or pole vault or paddling a boat. Yeah, most people would agree with that. Mm-hmm. So when you talk about the Chinese technique or the Russian technique or the Ukraine technique, the basic principles are exactly the same, except there's a couple of minor variations. Obviously, our Chinese colleagues tend, unless they're North China, tend to be shorter stature. They train a little bit harder than we do. They're more professional, and they go for a higher stroke rate. But the way they develop that stroke rate is broadly very similar to what we do. Yeah. So there's no real big revolution about that sort of thing. So you get these clubs, and Hong Kong's very particular about this. They're very secretive about their starts. But you really think about it, starting a boat, starting a race, you might say 6-6-6-6. Somebody else might say 3-5-7, but pretty much the mechanics of it are the same. So that's what the technique is. So what we're aiming to do with our paddle, and we'll talk about paddle lengths today, we're trying to develop the best possible force as opposed to weight into the paddle, and get the boat to move past the paddle, or the boat past the paddle past the boat. Yeah, which one? Boat past paddle. Yeah, we agree with that. Mm-hmm. Some people talk about locking on the front of the stroke, pole vaulting, that sort of thing, but pretty much the principle is the same. So you've got a body. So as a start of a 10, I just need a volunteer from the floor just to talk me through. So I know nothing about paddling. I'm a complete charlatan. I know nothing about it. How do I do it? Tell me something about what am I aiming to do? Either somebody volunteer. I'm going to pick on Nikki, actually, because Nikki's sitting there nice and quiet. So what is it all about? What is the point of paddling? Well, I know the point of paddling is to move the boat, but how do you go about it? What's the main aspects of it as you understand it?
Get the boat up and running to top speed as quick as possible, and get it over the finish line as quick as possible.
Okay, so dialing that back to the individual. So how am I going to, this average body I've got here, this 59-year-old body, how am I going to get that? What the basic aspects of it? The basic fundamental aspects of the individual stroke?
Start position, buried blade all together, not overreaching.
Okay, let's pick on one, because I'm going to unpick all of this. Burying the blade. Surprisingly, not all countries agree with that on the start. Canadians go with a half buried blade, but what's the point of having a buried blade? So that's your connection. So we talk about connectivity either with the boat or with the paddle, and you're putting force into the paddle rather than weight. Yeah, force has magnitude and direction. Weight is just weight. And obviously it's going through some sort of turning circle, bearing it and sweeping through, okay, which we'll talk about in a minute. So this connectivity with the water. So the blade entering the water, how does it do that? And what am I aiming to do? So let's just have a look at that. The blade in the water. What am I aiming to do when that blade is in the water? Anybody?
You're aiming to produce power so there is a good result on speed.
Right, okay, so I'm putting some force into that paddle, but what sort of angle should it be when it goes into the water? So we've got, let me get my simulated paddle. Got two angles to consider. If you're paddling forwards, I've got this angle, there, there, or there, and we've got side on this angle, yeah? So firstly, looking at the front on angle, what angle does it need to go in the water? Is it there? Is it flat? Is it
Parallel.
am I overcompensating to make sure I arrive at that, or is it slightly? So how do you understand that? That forward angle, what's that about?
So just like, sorry.
Oh, it's all right, G.
Go on.
So just like what Nikki said, it's going to be parallel because that's where you can put a bit more power to it.
Right, so it's needed at some point in that stroke, it needs to come back parallel to the center line of the boat. Yeah, we agree with that.
Mhm.
Okay. But how do we get it there though? People talk about top hand drive and that sort of thing. I'm pushing down, I'm pushing back. How am I doing it? What am I doing with my arms?
So your arm should be in kind of that position, and then enter the water.
What, with a wine glass?
Yes. I can't imagine.
Here, people talk about A-frames and this sort of thing. Let's just talk about this area here. Your shoulder. So where should it be locked out? Should I go for a lock shoulder? Some people talk about a lock shoulder. Should it be a chicken wing? Should it be somewhere in between? Should it have a soft bend there?
I think a soft bend at the top.
Okay, I mean, you hear me talking about soft bend, but why? Okay, yeah, I've been talking about that for some time, but why? What is that soft bend all about? Why does it exist? And what's the point of it? Because it's not, when we talk about A-frame, it's not like a C1 high sprint. We've got like a 5-foot paddle, slightly different technique there. But what's the point of that soft bend there? Why is that? Why am I not just locked out, as we sometimes see?
Is this to
You can get the blade in the water better, because if you're locked out like that, it's not going to hit the water right. So if you've got a bend in it, then you can like say, just kind of stabbing it rather than going in.
That's 90 stabbing the water, spearing fish. That's like 1970s, 1980s, 1990s. But we're getting the blade in the water efficiently and effectively, yes, but we're not stabbing.
Is it trying to use the bigger muscles?
So you
Which
don't
one?
have the water.
Your lats and your obliques. So you're trying to, instead of using your arms and your shoulders, you're trying to use your kind of core muscles.
It's the angle of entry, isn't it? If you're,
Yeah.
this is what Joe's been trying to help my technique, because my arm tends to go too high up to start with, and I've been trying to pull it back so that the angle of the blade goes in more like that rather than like that. So I've got longer lock on the water.
Okay, well hold on to that because I'll come back to that. But so we're going for a soft bend. I mean, you probably heard me talk about this, maybe not if you're more new to it, but you've got a big muscle in your back called your lats. It's not different, it's one muscle. But people think I've got a lat here and a lat here. It's one big muscle. It's like cape or shield shaped in the back. But less people know that the lats actually inserts into here, into your upper arm. So it goes, it's like a sinew, if you like. The origin is here, okay? So the only way I can engage that muscle, I engage that muscle in two ways. When I push down to engage, to catch the water, that's the first part of it. But then once the blade is in the water, I'm pushing down less, but I'm pulling with the core more. Like I'm still using the lats, still using the obliques, as you say. It's still the big muscle in the back I'm using, but I'm using it in a different way. Here, I'm derotating, I'm pulling with the core, and I'm driving with the leg. So lots of people talk about top hand drive, okay? Now I need to have that muscle unlocked. If the joint is locked, then I'm introducing strain. And if I give you the analogy that this here, this cup of tea, is my total body power, that's my 100%. I know we're not in a vacuum, but what I'm aiming to do is take as much of that available body power and deliver it into the paddle blade, into the water. Yeah, you'd agree with that. But of course, we're human beings, so we sweat and we've got various differences in technique, and we lose some of that body power because we're human beings. Okay? And some of the way we lose the power, if we've got too much tension in the body during the air work, and when I say the air work, I mean the part of the stroke, which is from the exit through to the next catch. Yeah? So the aim of that is to get literally, clearly from the back as efficiently and effectively to the front, but not force it. So if you remember that 1980s kids toy called Battling Robots, there was a red robot and a blue robot, and they used to go around like this and bash each other. Now we're not trying to get that. What we're trying to get is efficient and effectively forward. So we don't want to be gripping too tight. We don't want to be introducing too much strain or stress into the body, because we've got to overcome that and release it before we can paddle. So we're not floppy going forward. We're coming out efficiently, affecting it, presenting it, and then the power comes on. Yeah. But most of that power needs to be pulling backwards, or better still, locking the blade and moving the boat past that point. Yeah. So that push down, okay, all I'm really doing is locating that in the water, so I can then do the main part of the drive phase, which is with the derotation, pulling through the back, and I'm pulling in that straight line. Because if I pull in this direction, hopefully the boat will go efficiently in that direction. Yeah. Some of the Canadian teams, some of the older Canadian teams, talk about locked shoulder, and they actually paddle. They do a drill. They call it the bob drill. Now, okay, fine. But what do you see any particular problem with that? If I teach people, or you teach people like that, what's going to happen to the catch?
It's going to go in at a negative angle.
Right, so what you're going to do from there, you're actually, by the time you actually make the catch, it might just about be positive, but it's going to go negative straight away. So pretty much, if you're too locked out in this arm here, you're going to kill the catch. So we need to keep that catch for as long as possible, and why I'll come on to. So do we agree we're looking for it's relaxed, but it's engaged? No, relaxed is not sort of drinking a beer, smoking a cigar. It's getting the thing forward, but I need to be sufficiently relaxed in the body so I can actually get to my full extension. Yeah. Okay.
Tim, why do the Canadians do that then?
I don't know. I mean, they're quite a strong team, but when you see them paddle, they're quite a powerful team. But
Right.
when you see them paddle, it's the minimum of positivity. But I personally think the thinking is right, but the delivery is wrong. I think what they should be talking about is not a locked shoulder. They should be talking about an engaged lat.
Right.
It's not all. I mean, people talk about the Canadian stroke. There's 4 or 5 Canadians, because it's 4 or 5 different strokes depending on the coach. This is just the senior C side of things. So we need to be sufficiently flexible to get forward. Okay, right. So do we agree we're going for something in the region of what we call like an A-frame sort of thing? Yeah. Most people do that in the UK, but why? What's the point? What is the point of it? We do it, but we do it. We must do it for a reason. So why do we go for that big open body? In fact, what's happening with this one, by the way? Is that locked out? How tight is that?
Straight, but not solidly locked out. Otherwise, you're putting more stress on.
So if that's my simulated paddle, how tight do I need to be holding that paddle? I need to be holding it, but how tight does it need to be?
You know, drop it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But does it need to be a white knuckle ride? Because once again, if I'm gripping too tight, this is one of these common faults in all sorts of paddling. If I'm gripping too tight, 2 things are going to happen. What I'm looking for, if you think about it, is I'm pushing the paddle forward when I come forward, between thumb and forefinger. So what I want is to get that angle on the blade. So when I actually do my rotation and reach, by the time I make the catch, first touch to fully buried, the blade is positive and stays positive while I activate the catch and come through to the power point. I'll come back to that. So I don't want to be gripping too tight, because if I'm gripping too tight, two things are going to happen. First is I go from that nice positive angle to that, because you tense the bicep, so the tendons foreshorten. That's going to draw the paddle from there into there. That's one, if you grip too tight. Second thing, from the front, the average wrist is stronger in flexion that way than it is in extension that way. And what that basically means is, if I'm paddling, I'm gripping too tight, there's a tendency to move the paddle out that way. Just let me get, just hang on that thought. Let me get a paddle. Handy paddle. So there we go. So we go from that position there, and we it's too much, and we end up with the paddle going out at an angle. And you see this quite a lot. Now, if people are gripping too tight, apart from killing the catch vertically, you're also destroying that. You see what I mean? So it's actually moving out to the side a little bit. And what effect is that going to have on the boat?
We'll lose a lot of the force of the water will go wrong way of the blade. You'll lose a lot of force.
You get a bit of slippage. You get some lateral slippage off the blade, so you won't be able to grip the blade as much. But if you were able to put some force into that, you're going to create. It's almost like doing a bit of a draw, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You're introducing so that it's pulling in that direction. So if everybody did that on one side, the boat's going to start to move. But even if one or two people doing it, you're introducing disturbance. But you may not notice that, because when you think about it, the average open boat is going to be something like 1,900 or 2,000 kilos. Average ladies boat maybe 1,550 to 1,650. That's a big weight. And what actually happens is, if that's happening, you'll be carrying on paddling as normal. And the person who's actually correcting that is the steerer. Yeah. And all they're doing is sticking the thing in the water, and that's just creating drag. And what we do, as you probably know, when we train helms and race helms or steerers, is firstly we teach them to steer the boat by putting the sweep oar in the water. And in races, we teach them to keep it out the water. So what they're actually doing is, that's the water line. You've only just got the tip of it in the water to steer it. Obviously on turns, you're applying more force, but you want to keep that out the water as much as possible. So if we're paddling and we're introducing all these other extraneous turning forces, then it's got to be corrected. Otherwise the boat won't go in a straight line. Yeah. So that's important. So this is how I do it, because I come from kayaking. It's very much I've got that suspension point between the bottom two fingers, and it's sort of in the V of the hand there. And that just, I mean, I don't actually, for coaching, I talk about people pointing where they're going. So you're looking through the paddle or over the paddle, but it's that sort of thing there. So I've got that suspension point. So it's light, but it's sufficient. However, when it's fully buried in the water, this is Nikki's point, to Nikki's point exactly, when it's fully buried in the water, then it's tracking back perpendicular or parallel to the center, perpendicular to the gun or to the center line of the boat, but it's coming back parallel to a certain line of the boat. So once it's fully buried, when it's under load, so fully buried under load, how much force do I need to be putting into the paddle? I'll give you a clue. It's a race.
Everything.
100%.
Everything you've got. Absolutely everything you've got.
Yeah.
Aggressive.
Well, right. Okay. Let's. I'm trying to draw this out. So aggressive. Now that's a really good point, because yes, aggressive, but it's aggressive. It's a precision point. It's not a blunt instrument. You know what I mean? It's a very much a focused thing. Now, when I paddle in a race, what I'm actually trying to do, in my mind, I'm trying to bend or break the paddle. And if I did this with me SUP paddle last week, I was doing some sprints and I broke the paddle. Now I've got an extra OC paddle, but that's another story. So that's what's going through my mind. I'm trying to break the paddle. So you're delivering that much force. Occasionally it happens, but you know, not that often. So that's that point there, but a precision point. Now, you've seen the skim or the feather drill, yeah? Lots of teams do that. I mean, most teams do it. And that particular drill is great for a lot of different things. One of the things it's good for is seeing at what point, from a coaching perspective, people bring on the power. Now you'll be familiar with it. Let me just angle that down a bit. And the skim drill is basically it's skimming across the water, then you drop it, load it, drive it, yeah? So it's skimming, dropping, driving. And you can easily see when somebody, very often people will skim, they'll then go up and down the paddle. Skim, up and down. And it's the easiest sign that a paddler is starting their power phase early, because the muscle memory or neural pathways are telling them, I'll start my drive phase up here. So they tend to be going down and then back. So the reason why the aggression is a precision point rather than blunt instrument, what you often see is people get red mist rather than red line. So rather than that precision, they're basically smashing forward, smash it in the water and hoping for the best. Whereas you need to dial it back such that it's like Jekyll and Hyde. You come in efficiently forward, drop it, and then the power comes on when it is fully buried. And it's a fine line, because in the heat of a race, unless you do it lots and lots and lots and lots, you need to focus that. You know, people put it into the terminology they use is patience on the catch, and that's what it is. It's a microsecond to make sure that thing is fully buried before you start pulling back. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts on that? Any agreements on that?
I think I was going to say, why do we, when we come forward to do the catch, then do we have a higher setup position then? Why don't we initially, just if that's the natural thing you want to teach, start at a lower position before you go into the catch?
Well, what we do, good question actually, because if you're familiar with the American East Coast stroke, also known as the Philadelphia stroke, that the American Prems have done for years, it's a very low recovery. In fact, does Kingston still do the low recovery?
We try.
Right. So what's the, because I think that's pretty much the only UK club I know about that does that. So what's the origin of that?
Purpose is meant to be efficiency, so you're not wasting energy by raising up too high.
Right. Okay. So that's the idea. But I mean, it must come from the same tradition. Although I think Kingston also talk about do you still do that arm in plaster thing?
Yeah, but we don't. The trouble is some people take that too literally. So it's not literally you must have a completely locked out arm. It's trying to give people the idea of having that straight outer arm. It's just maybe the analogy isn't the best.
Recovery. On to that. The way a lot of the teams, and I tend to favour, I mean, I try all sorts of things. I've found that because I can absolutely see the point about the efficiency, the low recovery. So when you think about it, it's moving less distance. But what I've found by trying to paddle that way, both outrigger and dragon boat, is I can't get the height to get the catch. Now, to Ian's point about the height, one of the drills we do is a really high catch, because in my mind, I'm looking to do, it's like a touchdown or a volleyball spike, but that's presenting it at the catch point, which I'll talk about in a minute, but it's not smashing it into the water. And I've found just for me, I mean, other people find different. I've found the low recovery for me. I'm getting the reduction in movement, but I'm not getting the forward distance, which brings me on to, I'll answer your point specifically, Ian, but I'm going to ask you another question in order to answer that one. So lots of teams in the UK come up with either a horizontal or slightly above that, yeah? And then they lean down into the water. So you've got your catch point, whichever style you're using, your power point. And your power point, if you like, is when the blade is neutral in the water. And the physics of it, if you're in a vacuum, equal opposite reaction. If you excluded every other force involved, if I push in that direction, then the boat should move in that direction, yeah, efficiently. Okay. So that's the most efficient point. If you go into the physics of it, sines and cosines, when that is 90 degrees in the water, that's when that force I'm generating there is most efficient. It just is. But if that is the case, and let's call that the power point. The Yanks call it a sweet spot, but it's that point on which is most efficient and effective. If that is the case, why do I bother with a catch? Why don't I just come straight in at that most efficient point and paddle straight from there. Because surely that's
the boat up.
that
I'm
again.
trying to boat up.
Yeah,
I'm lifting
lift
the
the
boat.
boat.
Okay. So what would be the? I'm not disagreeing.
And
So
the
what's the
boat
point of lifting the boat?
Make it run lighter
Create
on the water.
speed,
Say that again, G.
to create the speed.
Greater speed, yes, greater speed. How? So what point, Nikki? At what point am I going to make that boat lighter?
The higher out of the water it is, the less surface tension it takes up and the easier it is to move.
That is one of the most misunderstood and fundamentally important points about the catch. When you think about it, yes, absolutely. And in fact, when it come to us with the Prems a few years ago, racing the Canadians, invariably, they would beat us off the start. And then when we got up to speed, we'd move down the course at the same speed, except they'd be in front of us. But it's this whole idea of beating us off the start. So just to unpack that, that's exactly that. You've got your catch point, boat's going in that direction. Catch point, think about where the force is going. Some of the force is going down and some of the force is that way. Obviously, it's a rotational thing. You know, I talked about force as opposed to weight because force has got magnitude and direction. So at this point, at the catch point, blade fully buried, there's a water line there, perhaps, or maybe further up. Some of that force is going down. And what's going to happen to the boat?
Go
Well, it should, that early part, it should create some lift.
Mhm.
At Nikki's point exactly, surface tension, acceleration. When you get through to the power point, which is probably 30 centimeters, that's all it's going to be, something like that, maybe longer, maybe slightly shorter. What I'm actually doing, when I get to the power point, I'm accelerating a momentarily lighter boat. So if I'm applying the same force to a lighter boat, it's going to go faster. And that's why that's a fundamental thing about not just general paddling, but certainly getting a boat moving off the start. Yeah. But there's more to it. So one, and the one that people get less often. So I'm lifting the boat momentarily to make that boat apply that acceleration more effectively and efficiently. So what's the other reason for the catch then? There's a number of reasons. So one is lift. Any other reasons? Reasons why I come in advance of the power point, this 90-degree point. Any other reasons?
Do you need a moment to actually generate the speed?
Yes, more than that. What I'm thinking of is, say, outside, my car breaks down. So once I get the boat moving, break the inertia, then it's easier to push something that's already moving, isn't it? Yeah, that's one point. And the other thing is, in order for me to be at my maximum or optimum power at the power point, bearing in mind this thing is taking place in 0.6 of a second if I'm doing 60 strokes a minute, then what I want to do is, as much as I can, is accelerating that boat or accelerating the blade through the water. So when I get to the power point, that is most effective and efficient. So exactly to Mike's point, I've got an acceleration component of it and I've got a lift component of it. Anything else?
Compensation.
For what?
If you come in directly at where you want to pull back, then you're probably going to be a bit too late. So if you come in a little bit forward of the power phase, then you might actually come in where you want to come in. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely, because the point is exactly and well made that if I was trying to come in there, because the boat's moving, the chances are I'm actually going to probably make the catch there. And people do that. So I'm trying to reach far enough forward so I can lock the blade on the front end. I can generate that lift and accelerate the blade sufficiently so when I get to that power point, that can be as effective and efficient as it can be. Okay, but how far forward? So how far? So yes, I've talked about 30 centimeters, but how far? You know, that's for me. But how far do you need to be reaching? You still see some people sort of from the 80s and 90s almost laying down on the gunnel. I mean, that far forward?
No.
It's going to depend slightly. You don't want to overreach, otherwise you're not going to be able to use your muscles effectively. But if you've got reasonable flexibility and you can still apply strength with the lean, then you can get away with it a bit more.
I mean, how long? I mean, Nikki's a little bit shorter than I am. So how long are your arms? Your
Not
arms,
very,
but you're
probably half the length of yours.
well, maybe not half. But the point is, whatever the length of the, I always get asked this. The length of the arms is not immaterial, but we need to be making the catch at the same point. So if there's any compensation in terms of length, that's at the back. But I mean, even Nikki being slightly shorter than me, then the difference is going to be a couple of inches in terms of the extraction point. So as long
As a reference point, we've often been told to try and bury your blade around the sort of hip region of the paddler in front of you.
I mean, it will be what we do with a lot of people is when they're new to it, it's sort of or new to a boat, and we decide they're going to be in seat 3, seat 4, seat 5, just something as simple as a piece of tape. But it's that reach point. But what is it? I mean, for me, it's going to be round about there. And you've probably done this in your clubs. The easiest way to do it is get people to sit in a boat in a comfortable position, come forward, and then overreach. And you soon know in your obliques, in your hamstrings, when you're going too far. Yeah. So you get to know what is your optimum, I call it limit of strength and dexterity. It's like having a Swiss ball. Yeah. Swiss, that's really, unless you're from outer space, the area you're working is this area here. You're certainly not working behind your hip, because we do something, an exercise with paddlers where I'll get a paddler to stand behind me, or I'll stand behind them, arm out parallel, and I say they pull my arm in that direction and say that's quite strong. Then I move forward, yeah, that's very strong, and we try and get them to do the same thing behind the hip, and they're generating very little force. So by the same token, I don't want to be going too far forward, but I don't want to be going back past the hip. Anyone want to comment on that? So I don't want to be paddling past the hip. Is that going to work? Because I'm not strong behind there. So how do we interpret, if people agree with that, you don't have to agree with it, but how do you interpret that? So you don't generally paddle past your hip.
Paddling past the hip, you're then going to be creating some drag on the boat.
Why? Yes, absolutely, but why?
Negative paddling.
Right,
because
so
of the angle of the
pulling the boat down.
Right, so if that's the catch point, that's the power point, then the aim is to keep it positive, keep it as we sit up, we keep it neutral for as long as possible, but with the best in the world, it's going to track negative towards the end. Yeah, I still can get some motive force out of that negative blade, but if I go too far with it, by the same token, that's creating lift that end. If I'm then creating too much downforce on the blade, I could, if I go too far, be actually pushing the boat down. So what I put on at the front, I could take off at the back. And I don't know if you've done any work with data paddles. I've done some stuff in the US, and it's amazing when you have a look at it. In data paddles, it's not particularly user friendly. You need a data engineer to go with it, and they measure the force bizarrely in kilos rather than newtons or watts. But when you've got somebody who's strong off the back, their frontal curve is there, and their back curve is the same. And that's quite extreme, but you end up with generating the same force positive here and then taking it off at the back. Now, further in the campaign, as and when we get back in boats, we'll start talking about this push off the back, the spring off the wall. And it's like what you're doing is accelerating the blade through the water. I know you can't compress a liquid in physics, but that's what you're thinking about doing. And this wall of water, if you like, or the brick wall, or whatever you want to call it, at your hip, you're springing off that into the next stroke. You're springing off the wall. You're not smashing it down. Yeah. But in terms of how I'm holding the paddle, because people talk about we don't paddle past the hip, but what does that actually mean in terms of holding the paddle? So does that mean, so there's my hip there. Does that mean I'm out at the hip? Does it mean I'm out there? Where exactly? What does it actually relate to? So where am I? Any thoughts?
Start coming out of the hip, Tim.
Start coming out of the hip. So what's the reference point? So I'm not strong behind this point. So my hand doesn't track behind that, yeah? The blade does. But generating force, the force comes off there, either tails off if we do that sort of profile, or if we're springing off, we're initiating again from that point, okay? But it doesn't track to there. But don't do the outrigger thing where it's coming out too early. And you've probably seen outrigger blades, and this is the point of some confusion, because an outrigger blade, in fact, hold that thought, I've got one.
He's going to come back with an outrigger now.
There's one in the garden here.
Okay. Outrigger blade, one I produced earlier. You'll notice on the average outrigger blade, depending on the make, you've got a dihedral on the front of the blade, yeah? Now, what that actually does when you're paddling, especially in rough water or in the sea, that sort of artificially creates that positive angle for you. And the outrigger stroke, bearing in mind they're sitting further forward than we would in dragon boats, what they're doing is creating that positive, and they actually extract at mid-thigh. So even though at mid-thigh, and this is a double bend, but have a look at the bottom end of the, even though the shaft of the paddle is tracking back negative, the blade is still positive. Sorry, it's still neutral. So the whole point of that shorter stroke in outrigger is it goes from positive and comes out neutral, yeah? Now, what a lot of people do who paddle outrigger as well is confuse that and then start pulling out at mid-thigh with a dragon boat paddle. But what you're actually doing is losing an extra piece of spring off the back. Okay, so that's one of the fundamental differences between it. And there's a few clubs that do that, and they do quite well, but you're losing half of the, not half, you're losing a third of your possible power. Now, when we're talking about the whole concept of springing off the back, I've measured it on data paddles, and what most UK clubs do when they paddle, if you think about this is the catch, so you've got that rapid uptake of power. This is like your power point, and then depending on how efficient you are, it tails off. But with the spring off the back, what you've got is you've got your catch point there, your power point there, and then it flattens out. And for me, and probably most of you, you can generate a third of your body power out the back of the stroke. So rather than just let it tail off and just coming out, you're actually working that back end to get more bang for your buck or bang for your paddle stroke, okay? More about that when we actually do it practically. But this idea of generating the power and bringing it shorter. So stroke rate, let's talk about stroke rate for a bit. So do you, with your teams, do you have like an optimum stroke rate? Do you have a 200 stroke rate, 500 stroke rate? What's the connection with stroke rate and boat speed? What's your thoughts about that?
Are you trying to catch the boat before it slows down?
I mean, does anybody here have a particular stroke rate that do you have a 200 rate or 500 rate? And why is a 200 rate higher than a 500 rate, for example? Do you know why we do this? Do we do this? And you do a 2000.
To a degree.
So
I don't think at Kingston we have a defined, this is how many strokes a minute you will do it for this race.
Yeah.
But it is the 200-meter race, and I think the majority of clubs will probably do the same, is going to be faster than their 500-meter rate. And that's probably more because you're getting, it's such a short race in 200 meters anyway. You're more likely to be able to sustain a high rate for that distance and get up and running. There's not enough time to get glide or momentum on the boat, really. It's just kind of get the power in, get the stroke on.
I think, Ian, yes.
I was just going to say, does it not depend on your actual boat makeup as well? Because some people can do a higher stroke rate than
Oh yeah, I mean, you can only work with what you've got. If your crew can't
yeah.
maintain a certain stroke rate, then it doesn't matter what your coach is saying.
Yeah.
I mean, I coach a team in Limassol in Cyprus, and all of the Cyprus teams for some reason, since they've been doing it for 10 years, there's almost an impenetrable connection between, they think fast boat equals high rate. And what it's, I try to say to them, it's like driving your car at 50 kph, 30 miles an hour in 4th gear or 2nd gear. You're achieving the same speed, but you're expending more energy. And I think to Nicky's point, when you talk to various clubs, you say, well, look, Thames is a good example. Thames has a 200 rate and a 500 rate. Okay, great. They say, why'd you do that? Why? I mean, I don't dispute it, but why exactly did you do that? And I think most teams say, well, we don't have time in the 40, 50, whatever it's going to be, seconds to do a proper transition. So actually, it's more of a, to my mind, it's more of a panic reaction. And frankly, when we do really, the tactic for 200 tends to be set the rate, do a transition, maybe settle it and then go, and fair enough. But just by way of example, and this is just coincidentally, I've just been on, before I come on here, I was on the Ergo, and one of the things I've set for this week is a 30 stroke, so maximum effort for 30 strokes. And so in 30 strokes, so at 35 strokes a minute on an Ergo, 270, at 29 strokes a minute, 295, 29 strokes a minute, 296, 30 strokes a minute, 288, 40 strokes a minute, 235. So I'm paddling fast, or pulling faster today, just five runs on an Ergo. So I've got a higher stroke rate, I'm expending more energy, but I'm actually traveling less distance. So what we'll do in terms of stroke rate is, rather than saying, well, this equals 200, we've got to work, the first thing that comes before you ramp up anything is technique. Getting back to that again, because the term is, it sounds like psychobabble. It's not psychobabble, it's psychophysics. Now, has anybody done any martial arts here?
Years ago.
Right. So if you were teaching somebody how to punch, whatever style of you're using, you'd say, right, well, you draw it back, you come to this position, and then you start here by the hip, and then you unwind the hip, it generates through the hip, this serratus anterior, and you end up punching through the target, yeah? Whatever. But you slow it all down, don't you? You slow it down so you understand, so your body understands and feels the component parts, how you generate the force, the fact it comes from the hip, through the hip, transfers into the arm, and your arm is just a connecting rod, and then you punch through the target, yeah? So once you've got the technique and you've got it really slow, then you start speeding up. And I do it quite a lot with people who say, new paddlers, they say, right, punch my hand. And they do like a rabbit punch. Now punch my hand. Now slow it down. Now punch my hand through the wall. And once they think about the technique and where that power is coming from, and the psychophysics bit comes in, it's two Victorian blokes, Weber and Fechner, I think their names were, and they come up with this idea. It's about perception and reality, or stimulus and sensitivity. So the more stimulus, the less sensitivity. So really slowing it all down and understanding how you're generating the power. Once you've got that technical stuff, then once you've got the technique, then you can speed it up. But what we all tend to do in the UK, and certainly in Cyprus, is you ramp it up. So technique, you do technique just for slow stroking, and then you start a race and it all goes to rat shit, and you go into red mist rather than red line. We all do it to a certain extent, yeah? Whereas with a bit more discipline in the boat, then just, they call it the chug in Hong Kong. Trust in the chug. This is the rate we do it. So we're focusing on generating power rather than wheel spinning. So, all you've got to do is sit on an Ergo, and you'll be doing a less stroke rate. And like we say to people on Ergos, try and keep it between 26 and 28 and generate the same power, but with the less strokes. Just focus on that. Yeah, that's why. So what we're doing when we get together, we're doing a lot of stuff on stroke rates and seeing how far you can move. Because if you can peg the stroke rate, then all you've got to go, the metric you're then using is efficiency of the stroke, yeah? Does any of you do any stuff with your clubs with stroke rates particularly, or is it just like that's about 60 strokes a minute, whatever? Or are you more precise about it? Do you actually do a run at 60 the same run at 50, the same run at 40, and that sort of stuff, and look at any differences? Or there's not many clubs that do it, if at all? No.
I think they've used different techniques, Tim, but not necessarily specific stroke rates. So we use like different techniques, like more time in the water techniques, and then we'll compare the times on the same runs. So like a 4 bridges using one technique, 4 bridges using the other, and see which one's actually faster, which sort of proves the point maybe in a different way.
Tell me about that. So more time in the water. So
more patience on the catch, more patience when you're in the water, as opposed to what you're saying is all hell for leather. I think what Dave was saying in amateurs is about when you've got your catch is take your time in the water to produce the power. And he's always trying to bring us back to slowing the stroke down, but actually generate more power. Not exactly what you're saying is not increase it. If you increase the stroke rate, it doesn't necessarily increase the power.
Often it doesn't. I mean, you could get away with it. And to Nicky's point, once you've in a 200, it's a relatively short race when you think about it. Hopefully 50, 55 minute a second, something like that. Once you've got the boat momentum going, you just keep it going. But it's not necessarily the most efficient way of doing it, because when you think about it, if you could do one big stroke and propel yourself 500 meters, that would be, from a body point of view, far more efficient than if you did 500 strokes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But so just coming up on 50 minutes now. So just we're talking about technique a lot, but just talking about this point about I think the seniors at some stage were talking about hang and bang or something, but the idea was, having spoken to Alison, the team then had not an issue, but a focus point for them, if you like, for want of a better term, is actually coming forward at the right time and the timing on it. So they sort of initiated was it a punch forward, Nicky, or what was it?
I don't recall anything about punching forwards.
It might have been the open boat, actually, thinking about it, because Graham was doing it, but they were talking about the idea that to get forward, they were actually fairly aggressively coming forward so they could get the catch. So what do you think about that? An aggressive move forward before you drive down. Any thoughts on that? A few shaking their heads. Why?
Yeah, well, that's what we get taught not to do, is punch forward.
Right. Why? Why is that? I mean, they were doing it in this group in the seniors. I think it may have been just if Nicky's not familiar with it, it must have been just the open squad.
That could just be my memory.
Oh, okay. But they were
aggressively
coming forward, dropping and driving.
It's been mentioned in OC6, where my background is, but it once upon a time. But it feels like a waste of energy, because you talk about that's your recovery, right? That's where you should be super relaxed when you're coming back.
I mean, that point exactly. So if your tradition would be the whole idea of a punch forward, if you think about it, how many, I'm talking about trying to maximize the effectiveness and efficiency of the power phase in the water, and the recovery and the setup is, I say merely, you're getting forward, but you're sufficiently relaxed so you can put the power in where the power is going to have some sort of motive, generate some power. If you're punching forward, say you're doing 60 strokes a minute and you're doing a 2-minute 500, that's 120 punches you've thrown down the racecourse. Now, I've got to say, they were doing it because it was a bigger issue for them. It wasn't a full-bodied punch somebody through the screen. It was to get them forward. So that for that particular configuration of the crew, that was a bigger issue for them.
I think depending on your, sorry, Tim, depending on your interpretation of a punch in the paddling sort of sense, you're going to lose, if your muscles are tense on that punch, you're actually going to lose range of motion because your muscles are already contracted.
Yeah, absolutely. I think exactly, because you're tight when you're doing it. But, and this is the last point I'm going to talk about today. So even though that motion, we don't want to be punching, is that motion or that movement of the body still beneficial to us?
The rotation is.
Right. So where is the power from the stroke coming from?
Largely your core in terms of the body positioning to set you up in the right way to use the muscles.
So it's actually coming, if I go on there, it's actually coming from the hip, isn't it? It's not coming from here. All my arm is doing, to give better elevation there, I'm actually moving. So off the back of the stroke, I'm activating the hip, and it's as if the hip is connected to the front arm. So as the hip moves, that's going to generate my rotation, yeah? So it's the same action as punching, except I'm not punching. What I'm doing is activating the hip and then moving with this big muscle here. It's a big sort of, it comes around like that, serratus anterior, the big swing muscle to get the thing forward, yeah? So, that being the case, last point today, how do we get forward? Now, I won't ask Nikki to do that because they do something slightly different. But those who have traditions where it's a more vertical presentation, what's the point of that? And it's just going to answer Ian's point regarding why we go for that high setup. So how do we generate that? Is it just with the shoulders, or how do we do it?
In your hips, as you said.
Right, so the hips.
Mm-hmm.
But so what am I doing? What am I'm extracting here, pointing forward. How do we think in terms of how that I'm going to end up? I'm going to start here and end up there. How do we do it?
We're reaching forward with the back. Starts from the back.
Sandy, say that again.
When we're reaching forward, we've got to have the power in the back as well as a core, as you're drawing, because you're engaging all these muscles on the back. What do you mean?
For me, I have to kick my legs. I have to push my leg through my leg.
Right, so you're using, so I'm presuming you're sitting inside leg or outside leg forward. We've got one leg forward, one leg back.
I have, can't remember now.
If you're amateur,
the inside leg. Yes, the inside leg.
So when you're pulling with the core, because the amateur stroke comes from high kneel sprint. So you've basically, you're an individual effective paddling unit by yourself. A lot of other teams are outside leg forward, which is biomechanically more powerful but slightly less stable. But each of another story. What's good about that? But you're pushing with one leg on your derotation. So on your rotation, your setup, you're recuperating with the back leg to drive forward. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Okay. So what are you doing with your hand then? So that's generating that hip movement there. So how do you get it out the water and to there?
I don't do anything. I use my wrist. I adjust the angle of my wrists.
Right. In what way?
So I extend my wrist slightly.
So extending as in?
So extension is that. So I just, yeah.
Right. So you're drawing out. Alan Parfrey used to be the coach of seniors, and it's still good. He used to talk about drawing the sword, which I think is good. But I talk about drawing the sword and pointing the bow. There's two movements to it. The first movement is the draw out of the water. So I'm leading with this hand, which is what G's talking about. So I lead with this hand, but this hand is like connected, well, metaphorically to here. So when that moves, the hip moves. So I draw out to there. So I'm leading with this hand, and then I'm leading with this hand on the second part, and that creates my rotation. Okay, so it's draw and then point. Yeah, most people do that. With Kingston, it's a more flat of movement. It's more sweep round and present. Yeah. Which brings us on to that final point. Why the high setup? What's the point of it? There must be a reason.
Eventually, you will lose height anyway.
Okay.
Of the rotation and also to recover.
Okay. Let's do your Liverpool accent creeping in there again. Right. So the reason we do it is quite simply is to get sufficient height so we can get the reach. Because what a lot of people in the UK do, most people understand the twists. I mean, some people still do this. Look at their inboard people. Most people now are moving around the core, that sort of thing. But the only way they can get a reach forward is by actually getting it up and down. And the whole point of it is, which they don't do in Kingston, is the whole point is you're opening up the hips. So a big hip, slightly, I mean, the hip is flexed as it comes forward, but you're opening up the hips in order to lay it down. That's the whole reason for the big setup, is so you can, in theory and hopefully in practice, reach further forward, because in order to do it, you've opened up the hips rather than just try, because I try and reach from there, I'm limited. If I'm opening up, I can come further. So the reason for the high setup is to open the hips and then lay it down, maybe not that high. That's the purpose of that, yeah? But what we don't want to be doing is reaching too far forward for the reasons we mentioned earlier, yeah?
Mhm.
Okay. So that sort of movement there. Very last point, You mentioned wrist. What's going on with your wrist at the top of the stroke? So are you, when you're holding the paddle, when you're coming forward, are you holding it wrist neutral?
Mhm.
Are you?
I seem to have my wrist
That's flexing
neutral.
there, or are you extending?
Well, from the way I do it, I have my wrist neutral because I seem to have more power that way.
Okay, so that's neutral, it's straight line, that's flexed, that's extended. So what happens if I extend it? Lots of people, when they paddle, they drop it in the water, make the catch, and then roll the wrist, kill the catch straight away.
Mhm.
Right. So what I've got this off Johnny Pourquier, actually. He's quite a well-known outrigger paddle. He doesn't actually teach rotation anymore, which sounds a bit bizarre, doesn't it? He says it's too confusing for people. I did a lesson with him in Singapore in 2019. He says it's too confusing for people to teach rotation because they always get it wrong and they over-rotate. So what I do now is when I paddle, I just make sure this hand is in front of this hand. And this wrist is either neutral or it's slightly flexed. And on the catch, if it's slightly flexed, you will get, and you've got this hand in front of this hand, you'll get a positive angle on the blade. Yeah. Now this is talking outrigger, and he paddles a bit further down, so I prefer up here. So neutral or slightly flexed. Now when it's under load, it's different because most of the motive power is coming from the core and the leg. But one of the biggest crimes against paddling, if you like, is to roll the wrist. You see it a hell of a lot, where people, we spend a lot of time looking at rotation and reach and that sort of stuff. By the time the blade is fully buried, the first thing that happens is they get power on, roll the wrist, and then from that point forward, the boat's paddling you. You're no longer paddling the boat. So the idea, I talk now about whatever you catch, you keep. So whatever force I'm applying, and yeah, depending on your body shape, body size, whatever power you're generating on the front, whatever force, you carry that force all the way through. Hopefully positive through to neutral. And most people will track negative at the end. You see what I mean? So it's a different focus. But the way I talk about that now, and I nicked it off Johnny Pourquier or borrowed it and give him credit for it, is that position there where you're loading that front end, and that stays either, I probably actually prefer it probably slightly cocked. So I talk about a cocked wrist these days, just to make sure, because if I start there, I'm going to end up there. The problem is with a lot of people, we're all the same, all human beings. If we start there, we tend to end up there. So that is my ending point. So I start there and track it through. And what I suggest you do, I'm going to talk about next week, I'm going to talk about position, where you actually hold the paddle. But if you're able to paddle in the next few weeks, I mean, some people are, some people aren't, just try that with just cocking your wrist. It's not locked out totally at the front end of the stroke, just to make sure you've got a positive catch, fully buried, and it goes from positive to neutral as it tracks back, rather than what a lot of us do, start a neutral and then lose the catch, kill the catch because you roll the wrist. Yeah. Give that a go. Give that a go. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, that's 1 hour already. So I mean, what I'm gonna do is, talk about a variety of things. And I really, what the way it works is getting your feedback and your ideas and your questions and that sort of thing, and just keep things momentum going. Now, I can send out YouTube videos because I love making them, and I can send out emails and blah, blah, blah. And some people read them, some people don't. If this is a successful thing, if this works, it works because you say it works, because you think it's worthwhile. So, and it doesn't matter how many emails I send. If you think it's worthwhile, you'll tell other people, and other people will come along. So what I'm going to try and do is make it as interesting and informative and innovative and interactive as I can. I don't know what the future is going to bring. I mean, looking at the news today regarding the pending bun fight in relation to AstraZeneca and between the EU, I can see, you know, we're ahead of the game apparently in terms of inoculations, but I can see things blowing up in Europe, and I would have thought the Europeans is very, very, very unlikely. But the point is, I'll carry on assuming it's taking place and then have a fallback position from there, and then we'll fall back and fall back and fall back and see where it goes from there. Yeah. My job, whilst I've got the job, my highly paid job, is to generate options for you, try and keep you interested, try and keep you engaged. So if it does suddenly there is a competition, we're in a good shape to sort of springboard into it. And I enjoy doing it, so that's fine. But yeah, so do you think that that sort of session is worthwhile? Just give us a bit of feedback. If you think it's a load of nonsense, say so. I don't mind.
Can I give my feedback first, please, Ian? Sorry, Tim.
Yes.
It's just I'm hanging at the moment. Sorry, I've got my foot's hurting, so I've got to go and rest now. And it shouldn't be down this long, but I am on the road to recovery. I love what you're saying, and it's interesting, and I can't wait for the hand bits next week, or when we do it again, the hand position, because that's one thing I struggle with. But yes, I get things back to front, so I don't say it the right way, but yeah, I don't understand your terms sometimes, and I answer it like positive and negative going in. That's what I meant, but what I said is kind of different, like sparing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, so that would be my feedback. It's really interesting, but sometimes I get a bit lost with it sometimes.
Well, what's quite important is, I mean, we often talk about positive, negative, and neutral, and connectivity and that sort of stuff, and very often we assume that people understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, but I don't.
Talking another language, some paddleology, paddle speak. Just stop me, because the chances are, if I'm talking a load of nonsense that you don't understand, then somebody else will be in the same position. So, you know, the only, as always, the only daft question is the one you don't ask, because at the end of the day, I can be spouting all this stuff, but if it doesn't mean anything, and I said the same thing in Dubai and Hong Kong, if it doesn't play in the UK or Mauritius, or it doesn't play, and I can talk as much as I want, and people won't buy into it because they don't understand it. So, you know, you've got to stop me and say, no, what are you talking about?
Okay, can I say goodbye to everybody now then? Because I need
Bye.
to go. Thank you.
Bye.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you, guys.
Bye, Sandy.
Okay.
See you soon, I hope. Take care.
Tim,
Yes.
Tim, can I just follow up with what Sandy said? Because you were explaining about biomechanics of how you do the paddling. Because of my background, the terminology is different from what you're using, so that will confuse me.
Okay.
Instance, to us, this is a wrist extension, and you call it flexion. So if you're going to take note of it, I will be very confused if I'm reading it or if I'm listening to you without your demonstration. Because
so for you, flexion is that way, extension is that way.
no,
Other way.
this is flexion, and that's an extension. So
Okay. Right, in that case, I'm talking about extended wrist rather than flex wrist. Okay, right.
yeah, and you can check that as well, because that's
That's fine.
right terminology.
Brilliant. Okay, so extended wrist, not flex wrist.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Angie.
I just want to say it's really nice to actually get together as a group and see everybody. As well as kind of the instruction, it's just the fact that we're getting together and actually becoming a team again.
Yeah, I think, yes, because there's so much gone on, but it's I think it's vitally important.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think I've seen most of your faces for a year.
You've been lucky.
At these two.
Sorry about that, Nikki.
Bob, more often.
Yeah.
Have a spoil your year.
I think that's
just-
oh, go on, Nikki.
Sorry, no, I was just gonna, just a quick question, more of curiosity, really. So in Hong Kong at the moment, what's their situation?
Very, very similar to us in that they're not going to be paddling. I mean, all the beaches are closed off. They're literally taped off. There's a few beaches on the south end of Shek Ko, which is south end of Stanley, where people can paddle boats and the police don't patrol, but they can't get out at all. All the gyms are closed. Everything's closed. And it's likely to be closed until Chinese New Year, which is the 12th of February.
Yeah.
So they are a lot of despondency there. I mean, Mauritius, Chris is doing what he wants, which is fine because he's the only person dragon boating, and Dubai is bizarrely, they raced last weekend. They've only got 10 in the boat, but they're all buoyant because obviously they're paddling. So this is going to be a big issue all around. And if it, we've just heard our lockdown's going to go at least until the 8th of March and probably longer, and all the rest of it. So, yeah.
I mean, I know obviously the whole pandemic and everything, it's not just how well the UK is doing by the time November rolls up. But I am kind of conscious of the fact that somewhere like Hong Kong is probably going to be stricter than a lot of other countries.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's going to be the potential of, you know, not being allowed, if the competition goes ahead, not being allowed in unless we're all fully vaccinated, potential of quarantines and that kind of thing. So,
well, no, to be quite honest with you, we're all focusing on, and obviously the BDA is focusing on paddling in the UK. And one of the things we did a meeting last weekend. It was a good idea, but it was nonsense in that at some stage in the summer, the BDA's approached, or the executives approached DCMS, the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, and asked about people being allowed to paddle and whether the GB team should have elite status. Now, it won't. I'll tell you why it won't. Because firstly, this is talking about the Olympics and people are essentially in a training bubble anyway. But imagine this. If they said you can't paddle in the BDA unless you're in the GB squad, we'll suddenly have 500 people in the GB squad. Yeah, so it's not, I mean, it's good that people are thinking about initiatives, but one of the things they were going to put forward to the DCMS was that if you were training at a BDA, a GB event, then you have a COVID test, which would be a PCR test. The last one I did to travel was 125 quid, and self-isolate for 4 days. I mean, that's not going to work for anybody, is it? So you see what I mean? But so they're trying different initiatives, and all credit to them for doing that. I can't see that. You know, unfortunately, we've been saying for a year now that the blessing of a dragon boat, you know, everyone's in the same boat, doing the same thing, working in each other's intimate personal space. It's also the curse of dragon boating. And I thought, if anything, we're probably going to be one of the last sports to get back up to speed. And Nikki will tell you, anybody who's done any, especially European competitions, we're fairly phlegmatic in the UK, but a lot of the European nations, they complain about everything, anything that's slightly unfair, they complain. And one of the worst complainers is Ukraine. So if you think about sort of the rollout of vaccines, yeah, people aren't able to train properly. So I can think there's so many impediments to the competition taking place. But we'll just have to see. And I think what will happen with the IDBF last year waited until the IOC decided on the Olympics. And I think what will happen is they'll do the same thing. So if the Olympics goes ahead, we'll go ahead. But even in November, I think the week before the IDBF, no, the week after is the rugby sevens, and people are trying to cram all sorts of events into things. And as Nikki's point, I don't know what's going to happen to airfares, requirements. I think people might be priced out of the market because they're not just flying to Hong Kong. They've got to go there for 10 days beforehand, quarantine, whatever, you know.
Potentially quarantining at our own expense when we come home.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, we're going to end up in the checkbook squad or the time rich squad. So we might get a senior A, a senior B, and a senior C. But I don't know. But like I say, we'll carry on preparing until there's nothing to prepare for, and if not, we have a good time anyway. That's my thinking, and that's realistically.
Looking, one more question, looking much further ahead. Do you know yet whether you're intending to reapply as senior A coach next year?
Haven't really given it much thought, to be honest with you. At the moment, I'd say no, because the job was for 2 years. And I mean, I enjoy doing it, but
Been very funny 2 years for you though. or
it's a
whatever
funny
it
2
was.
years. I've got to say, having done the Prems for 5 years, I enjoyed that, but that was a little bit too long.
Active service.
And I think if you the last one, Kunming, was a year. And I think the conversation I've had with Alison did it for 6 years with the seniors. And, you know, I had to go away for 2 years, really. I did senior B, but, you know, just as a paddler and then come back with some fresh ideas. So I don't know whether that's going to work. So there might be a job for you next year. But you see what I mean? But I mean, my thinking on it is, even if nothing happened this year, then my job up until the job expires is to create a situation where you've got a cohesive group that can be as together as possible for whoever takes over next year, really. But I'm not thinking of carrying on at this point in time, but who knows? Anything could happen. My life could collapse and that's all I've got left. I don't know. Whatever. But whatever. Anyway, Tony, any other point? Tony, any thoughts?
No, I've enjoyed it. It's been good to see everyone. Yeah, it's nice to see some people I've not seen before as well.
Okay, nice to see you, mate. And Scotty?
Man,
a few words.
No, just a little bit disappointing if obviously you don't decide to carry on and stuff. Just probably one thing that obviously speaking to people who are in the seniors through like other social media platforms, and I think like myself and maybe a couple of others respond not quite well to your training methods and stuff like that. But some people were saying that you found them a little bit confusing, and then that's why they weren't maybe engage with them as much as maybe they wanted to. For me, I don't mind it. Like I think I respond quite well to it, but I think some people were saying it was a little bit confusing for them. And then sort of taking that one extension further would be, I suppose, to keep it like really simple, because I know some people are teaching from home, some people are obviously working from home and they haven't got a lot of time. So I think the simple things that you're doing, I responded really well to them because obviously I'm working on the front line and I haven't got that much time. But maybe for some people who are really, really short on time with children, homeschooling, jobs and stuff like that from home, I think they were sort of pointing in the idea of wanting to be engaged, but to keep the training simple, but not too simple that it's not effective. And also, like some people were just mentioning that, and there's not much you can do about it, that they wouldn't, even if they were physically fit for like a European Championships or a World Championships, that they wouldn't be water fit, paddle fit, that they wouldn't have enough time on the water. And I think that's, you know, some people are a bit concerned about that. I'm concerned about that as well, because
yeah, me too, Scott.
I can go to the gym as much. I was going to the gym 2-3 hours a day, but I wasn't spending a lot of time on the water.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are concerned about the water time. You can teach us with your obviously your deep knowledge these things via social platforms, but I think as well we need to be together on the water and in front of people. Because I remember back to March when we were on the water together and there was energy building in the boat outside of your teaching. And that's something that probably I miss and probably other people miss as well. So for me, that was really important. The teaching from you is important. Going away and finding out information on my own is important. But the cohesiveness, the energy that we created as a set of people, no disrespect to you, but outside of you, that we were creating ourselves, I found that was quite important to me, like moving forward. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that I'm missing, that I remember that we had this togetherness emerging. Mm-hmm. And I think as soon as we get back on the water together, I think that'll come back quickly. but I think it's a very hard thing to teach via the internet.
I don't think you can. I think you're exactly right. I mean, a big part of all of this, any crew boat, is boat blending, isn't it? And we can do challenges, and we can do this, and we can link people up so they become faces rather than names. But nothing replaces actually sitting in a boat and working with somebody, you know, because that's where you really get to know somebody. So I mean, I'm not entirely sure how. You know, we've put in, when I say an intention, you know, a wish to take part in the Europeans, but that's only for the EDBF to say, you know, if all the ducks were in a row, if everything was working, would you be interested? Well, yes, we would. But of course, there's lots of barriers to getting involved and all sorts of things like that. So, yeah. But I would imagine in the next few weeks they're going to say, well, there's too many barriers, but whatever. But yeah, good point.
I think the thing is, Tim, the extension from that is that even if we didn't do anything in Europe or the Wales, that is as soon as practically possible, if we could all get together in Great Britain and do something as early as we could, obviously as safely as we could, but at the earliest opportunity to get back on the water together in this country and start doing stuff as soon as we could. I think that would be helpful.
Yeah. And if there's any number of people who just do not work with Zoom at all, not interested in sitting on a, you know, I get all that. I understand that. We've been doing it for a long time, and I can see that fatigue. But very, very good points. And like I say, all feedback is welcome. Yeah. So thank you for that. Brilliant. Okay. Thank you. Mike.
Yeah, I find what you are sending out, your videos and your training, very inspiring. I don't mind if there, I mean, obviously I would love to have a competition, but even if there is no competition, I just carry on because I just like it. I got lots of time. I just, and if it doesn't happen this year, I will, yeah, it's next year, you know?
Yeah. Okay.
And yeah, I'm looking forward to getting my kayak to get back on the water and paddle on the Thames. Unfortunately, just on my own, but yeah. What I noticed, I mean, because Scott said that it's sometimes confusing. Yeah, it can be confusing, the exercise that you sent out or not very clear, but then, you know, you're sending out so many things that, you know, you can pick from. You either do the 100 reps challenge, or you do the one of the calisthenic exercises or the weight training. You know, I just pick and just fill my day with that, and that is great. You know, you can just pick what you need, and that's really good. What I wanted to say is what sometimes where I miss information is because you're firing from all guns. You know, it's Facebook, it's YouTube, it's email, it is Microsoft Teams, and it's Zoom. And to keep up with that and to find all the information, that is sometimes difficult. So for me, it would be helpful if, you know, let's say all the information that we need, we could find on one platform, let's say Microsoft Teams or email or whatever. And then we can, you know, go from there, look onto YouTube or Facebook or whatever. I'm personally not using Facebook. That's why I miss some things. Your channel is the first YouTube channel I ever subscribed to, just to let you know, because I'm not into things like that, you know. But I would love to, you know, if there is a way that you can just post everything, you know, on Microsoft Teams, that would be helpful. And obviously then I would go to YouTube and look at the video that you post there. So sometimes I have the feeling I miss things, you know.
Great point, because we had the same conversation in Dubai, and most of them, I mean, I'm not a great fan of Microsoft Teams, to be honest with you. It's a bit, it's not very user friendly. So in Dubai, what we're doing is we're just using the main medium is Gmail. Yeah, so there you go. So the question then is, absolutely, which is your preferred medium? Because what I don't want to be doing is sending loads of stuff. I mean, there's stuff there. I want there to be loads of stuff that you can access, but you basically pick and play or don't. But I'm not suggesting you have to do everything. I can't suggest that, and I wouldn't do anyway. So what is your as the representative group, what is your preferred method? Hopefully it's something rather than nothing.
Gmail would be my preferred thing. I do have to use Teams, but I use it for work, so I'm never logged into both things.
I like Teams as a resource that you can go to when you want to. So if you want to read a document, it's there, rather than leafing through emails and that sort of thing. But any other points? I mean, my preferred is Gmail. What do you prefer? Because whatever you prefer, that's what we do.
I can't say that I like Microsoft Teams, but I find it quite handy, and it is a bit different from other media, but it's not rocket science. It's just a matter of getting your head around how it works and where you find the different channels. So it can be very useful, I think, and it's also useful for what Scott started, the chat about the reps. You just push each other. I have done this challenge. Oh yeah, well done. This easy exchange, like on a messenger, it is good for that. I don't know if that works with Gmail as well. So, I
mean, what I can do is send out a Gmail and say, basically, if you want that, that's there. If you want that, that's there. If you want that, that's there. And yeah, just so, yeah. But what I don't want to do is start. I know there's a Facebook, but I'm not a great fan of Facebook, actually, to be honest with you, because it's, you want one medium, as you're saying, that's if something is official, it's coming out via here. So if I say, if you're happy, if I say Gmail is the main message medium, but I'll store stuff like the weekly sheets if you're doing that, and stuff of interest, hopefully on Teams. So there's your permanent record, if you like. So you can dip into that. So if I'm posting something, I'll send a Gmail to say, by the way, if you want this, go there. If you want this, go there, and then you pick and play. Yeah. Okay. Right then, in that case, G, any points?
I think I have what Mike said, because that's totally was my issue. I'm completely got confused where to follow. So to a point that I missed out a lot.
Right.
Because I have to text Scott to ask him what's the challenge for today, and apparently it's in your YouTube. I'm fine whichever platform you use. I just need to know which one, because I'm working and I've got other roles that I'm doing as well.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's difficult. Yeah.
Okay. Fine. Right. So I'll simplify that down to something more user friendly. Okay. Fine. And thank you. Kat and Joe, any final points?
One thing I was going to add is that for Senior A 2020, you did a little video in your back garden of technique. I don't know if you remember doing it out on your bench. You covered, again, quite a lot of that, or drawn a lot of that out of us tonight. So maybe I've got that copied locally, but maybe if you can draw that back out and just make that available for everyone else to look at again if they can't find it, because I say it's quite a good video, and I refer back to that from time to time for my own peace of mind around getting my technique to be in line with the Senior A technique that you want. That's
a good one, because I can just post that onto Teams and say, by the way, if you want to do that, it's in this particular. Okay, fine. And
as I say, there's a lot in that. It's only a 9-minute video, but there's a lot in that again you just pulled out of us all tonight. So that's a good one to draw. Again, other comments around the platform, the media. I know that it's all over the place, so I look and share with Kat where I find things. So if there is a common platform, then that will be helpful. But I'll fit with in what you do. So that's cool.
Okay.
But the lethargy lockdown has been a lot of fun there, Tim. And thanks for redoing the with the shorts and the trousers, mate.
Apologies. I mean, Sonia did mention that to me. She said you probably exposed a bit too much there. I thought
I didn't watch that. I'm probably quite relieved I didn't now.
No, it's gone now. It's gone now.
You'll be spared. I've corrected it.
It's something that I can't unsee, but it's all right, Tim.
Okay, fair enough. And last but not least, Kat, welcome. Any points from you?
Yeah, I mean, you're trying to cater to everybody, aren't you? All the different streams, and that's how we're all under a different one. I look at Facebook, but I don't look at YouTube. I guess email is the common denominator. We've all got to look at email at some point. I'm brand new to this, so I'm playing catch up. But I said to you earlier, Tim, I looked at all of your 2021 lockdown lethargy challenge videos yesterday, and I think they're bloody brilliant. They're so useful because I've been a paddler for a lot of years, but I've not really done that much gym work, and sometimes I get sent written explanations of what exercises I should be doing, and I have no idea. I don't understand what they are, and your explanations and videos are so useful, and I do find them very simple and easy to understand and extremely useful. I want to watch them again and again. We did a load of the exercises from your videos before this call, and to know that they're paddler specific and they're going to help me prepare, even if there are no races this year.
Okay.
Like you said, it's like making them best of a shit scenario. We
Basically,
keep
yeah.
strong and we'll be ready when the time does come.
But you'll look forward to number 20 because that's burpees, everyone's favourite. My personal favourite exercise. Anyway, right. Okay, I've kept you long enough. Thank you very much for your points. Scott, thank you particularly. Very interested. If there's, I mean, give me some more detail offline regarding how I can simplify that. Because the bottom line is, as I say, if it doesn't play, you know, I'm not wasting my time, but I need to be making sure that I'm hitting the mark more often than I'm not. And if I'm confusing people, then I need to correct it. Simple as that.
I think the thing to take away from it, Tim, those things are easy for you to sort out and for us to get on board with. I think the thing that really sort of underplays it all is that no matter what time of the day we're doing the exercises that you're putting forward, is that we're doing them together.
Yeah.
So we're doing them together as a group. You might not be doing them at the same time, but we're doing them together for a common cause. And when I'm doing my exercises, one of the things that keeps me going back to doing them is somebody else is going to do them in a few hours, or somebody else has already done them. And it's that I'm doing them with other people that I find probably the most important part about it. Not so much the exercise, but doing them alongside other people.
To that point, and a final point is the World Championships in Welland, Niagara, 2015. I started paddling to Niagara 2 years beforehand. So every paddle stroke, every goblet squat, every press up was propelling me towards Niagara. Now that's my take on it. The only difference now is I don't know where I'm paddling to. It could be anywhere. So that's an interesting concept, because I'm thinking, if I'm not sure about, I can stay focused, but if I'm not I'm interested in how I can get people focused on something when I don't know what the end target is. And from a coaching perspective, that's quite a novel thing. Anyway, but yeah, I'll leave you with that philosophical conundrum to talk amongst yourselves. Okay, I've taken your time. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your kind comments, positive feedback. Always welcome here. Have a great night, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. See you later. Cheers.
Bye.